This thing is going to be my ticket to the big leagues, Ariel thought, as she whistled sharply through her teeth and put the coffee mug down on the desk. Even though her boss wasn't exactly thrilled with her new piece and her colleagues seemed less than ecstatic, she could feel it this time. Something was going on with this new cult, and she was the one who would completely blow the lid on it. Ariel stretched her shoulders, closed down the laptop lid, and stood up. The newspaper's office still looked like it had gotten stuck in time. An open floor plan with desk after desk arranged neatly next to each other, and her boss's room right at the opposite end of the giant office. 50 years ago, people would have to cross the floor to talk to the superior, but today, a simple email would suffice, she thought with a smile, turned and walked off. And that email would get to him as soon as she found the time for it. It wasn't like anyone expected much of her here anyway. Her colleagues still mostly thought of her as the new hire, the fluff piece writer, the next on the chopping block. It was an open secret that the paper wasn't doing well, and that some of the upper management were talking about letting go a few journalists. If that decision would have to be made today, her name would almost definitely be among them. But it wouldn't be made today. She still had time, and if she managed to get the story rolling, she'd have a fighting chance come whatever may in the future. Only 2 of her colleagues even looked up at her as she passed through the gaps between desks, and no one tried to stop her from leaving. Ariel kept her poker face and made sure to keep her steps steady and breathing shallow. The fewer people knew about what she was planning, the better. She reached the door to the stairwell and elevator, chose the former, and started slowly making her way down. Even if no one else could see it, this new cult she had stumbled upon would become big news soon. Ariel could feel it. It was the same sensation she had felt when she had only been 16 and had seen the vice principal and one of her classmates shooting each other looks. Something was going on here, and this time she was in a position to do something about it. Ariel opened her handbag and rummaged around for the crumpled piece of paper she had gotten not even 24 hours ago. It looked like a calling card someone had thrown into the street, drenched and stepped on, but on its back she could still see the outline of the cult's logo. With a bit of creativity, one could see many different things in it. A deformed moon, a hand with claws, or even a kind of fat lizard. She had no idea what exactly it was supposed to be, but that was something she would find out on her own soon. Ariel reached the landing of the second floor and held the strange calling card up into the light. A word and a few numbers had been scratched into the paper. The name of a less than popular bar in the worst part of this overflowing city. This was her first lead, and the thing that would allow her to push the door open. Ariel pulled out her phone and sent her boss a short message telling him she was following up on something and not to expect her back for a few days. The old man would probably frown, but wouldn't do anything else. As she finally left the old building behind and headed out into the street, Ariel felt the first shiver of excitement in what felt like years. This was real. Not some fluff piece or heartwarming emotional garbage reporting, but a real story. For almost a month now, there had been rumors and sightings of strange people and stuff going on in the darker alleys. Far more and far more sinister than normal. People were talking about this strange new religion that had seemingly appeared out of nowhere online. Yet, that information hadn't pierced the veil of real life yet. And she would be the one to do that. Nothing could be done about anything if people didn't talk about it. Political pressure should always start from below. She remembered something a professor had once said to her with a smile and looked around for a taxi. This cult or religion or whatever it was would get dragged out into the open. And maybe then the rumors would stop and get replaced by cold, hard facts. Ariel saw a taxi slowing down and hopped in, telling the driver to head for the worst part of the city. It was still noon, so she shouldn't be in too much danger, she thought. Yet put a hand into her bag to look for the taser she was carrying around with her anyway. Normal people didn't like to go there, and she knew exactly why. Drugs, prostitution, gambling, everything one could think of could be found there. Many of the buildings stood empty, turned from one's family homes into dark and damp drug dens. People carried openly. You'd see junkies, homeless people, criminals, and prostitutes on every street corner. The police hardly ever got involved there, or even showed up at all. It was like the city had been split in two a decade ago, with one side getting swallowed up by the darkness, and no one was ready or willing to do anything about that. Ariel scoffed and could feel the driver shooting her a glance. Maybe, after she had exposed the cult, she could take a closer look at whatever was going on in City Hall. Someone had to get paid off to look the other way, right? It would be far more dangerous than going after some underground religion, though. Softly shaking her head, she looked ahead and could see the buildings on the side of the road slowly turning less and less welcoming. Graffiti started to appear, followed by trash simply thrown out onto the sidewalk. This here was as far as most people dared to stray. At least, most normal people. But Ariel knew that she would need to go far deeper than that. Deep enough to be careful of the setting sun, she warned herself in her thoughts. Once night fell, that part of the city could swallow one up. She'd heard the horror stories for years now. Women getting abducted and used for God knows what. People getting robbed or beaten or killed for simply stepping into the wrong alley. And now, with the cult, those rumors had taken on a whole new form. She would find out if any of those had even a smidge of truth to them, or if it was just another case of the people on the other side of the city fearing what they couldn't see. The taxi turned off the biggest street into one of the side roads, and Ariel felt herself holding her breath. Around them, the buildings started to show signs of disrepair as the trash heaps got bigger and a strange, unwelcome smell penetrated the car. Somehow, the sun seemed to stay back as well, strengthening the shadows and darkness around them. Ariel felt a twinge of fear as she looked out into the street and could see the first huddled figures waiting in the darker parts of the alleys. Maybe she should have asked for someone to be her backup. Going in there alone might have been a bad idea, she criticized herself, then immediately shook her head. If she wanted to not draw much attention, going in alone was the right decision. She simply had to stay out of sight for most of it and keep her cool. Everything would be fine. And in case it wasn't, well, She had the taser with her and could run a mile in under 10 minutes. The next roads the taxi driver took got smaller and smaller as they wound their way through the really bad part of the city. No one had cleaned around here in years, it seemed like, and more than once Ariel looked out of the passenger side window and wasn't sure if the huddled figures she could see in the alley were alive or dead. This part of the city was collapsing, a thought hit her. It was getting ground into dust under the weight and pressure of the inequality on display. She knew that rich people were living here as well. Not exactly here, but around the part. They'd mostly moved into the upper apartments of the few skyscrapers and, according to rumors, their homes looked and felt more like compounds, guarded day and night. Those were the successful traffickers, pimps, and drug smugglers, mostly. She really didn't want to run into any of them, to be honest. The taxi rounded a corner, and the stench of garbage was invaded by a new odor. Oil and rotting fish. The harbor was close by, she realized, and looked around once more. A single massive fence blocked off one side of the road, and behind it she could see people in high-vis vests and helmets standing and talking. Two of them stuck out to her. Their faces looked strange. Beneath the rim of their yellow helmets, she could see their sunken-in eyes and sickly-looking skin. There was something alien to them, and Ariel felt another short burst of fear as one of them looked up and right in her direction. Luckily, the taxi drove on, along the harbor, before it suddenly came to a stop, and the woman driving her held out her hand. Ariel tried to smile as she pulled out a few bills, put them onto the outstretched palm, and hopped out of the car. The tires almost squealed as they set off again, far too quickly, and sped along the road. Shaking her head, she glanced around. Across the street was the bar she had been looking for, but what made her stop now was this feeling suddenly bearing down on her. Someone was watching. She raised her head and looked at the taller buildings on both sides of the small hut that should be the bar. Empty, dark windows as high up as she could see. No light was burning there, and the graffiti went up to the 3rd floor as well. This was bad, her instincts warned her. Behind one of those windows, someone was watching. She could feel the eyes resting on her as goosebumps broke out all over her skin. But without knowing where this person was exactly, she couldn't even tell them off. The only thing Ariel knew she could do was disappear from the streets. Either walk off or to the bar. She forced her eyes down and looked at the small building between the two giants on its sides. Years, maybe decades ago, it used to have a neon sign above the door, but it had lost its light along the way. Was it a sign that the bar wasn't even open right now? Fat chance. Nothing along the street was working, and Ariel was absolutely certain the bar would already be filled with customers. All she had to do was enter and find out what its connection to the strange cult was. She could feel her legs starting to shake at the thought and pulled the handbag in closer. The taser is still in there, she tried to calm herself and felt her fingers trembling slightly. What are you so afraid of? Ariel hissed at herself in her mind. This was what she had wanted all her life. A real story, not one of those tiny little pieces or a rewrite of someone else's effort. She could finally show her boss and colleagues what she was made of. Shooting one last glance up at the dark windows of the skyscrapers, Ariel set off and walked across the strangely deserted road. It all seemed completely dead. Not a single person was out here on the streets with her. No one was screaming or shouting or driving by. She couldn't imagine something like that happening in the better part of town. Everywhere you turned, you could see people, day or night, walking, talking, some even singing. Yet here, she felt like the last human alive. The shaking of her fingers got worse, and Ariel quickened her steps. At least in the bar, she'd be able to see whoever was looking at her, she thought with a humorless grin, hopped onto the sidewalk, and quickly disappeared through the dark and grimy door. Hot and stale air hit her in the face as the light outside stayed behind, and she entered what was probably the worst such establishment she had ever seen. There was grime everywhere. Dirt-covered floors no one had bothered to clean in weeks. The yellow-tinted light coming from a few naked lamps gave the strange space a surreal feeling, and Ariel could see 3 people looking up at her as she stepped in through the door. They were staring at her openly, and the hair on the nape of her neck stood up. She reminded herself of the taser in her bag and held it even tighter as she tried to ignore their eyes and walked over to the counter of the bar. A single old woman was standing there, with her back turned, looking at a row of old, yet cheap bottles. She'd have to spend some time here, she warned herself, reached the counter and knocked on the wood. Ever so slowly, the barkeeper turned, and the face that was staring back at her gave her the creeps, even worse than the 3 guys whose gazes were now firmly on her ass. The woman was sick. There was no doubt about it. Her complexion reminded her of old, clumped milk, while the skin of her face was peppered with black marks and old scars. Yellow teeth shone between her half-open lips, and one of her eyes was completely white and blind. Ariel didn't even try to smile at her as the old woman cocked her head and stared back at her expectantly. "Whiskey," she simply mumbled, reasoning in her head that the higher the alcohol content of the drink, the less likely she'd be to catch something in here as well. The woman's tight lips slowly turned into a smile as she pulled a bottle off the shelf and a glass from beneath the counter. Ariel could see stains and smears on and in the glass, but didn't let her revulsion show. She waited for the old woman to slowly open the bottle and pour liquid that stank like kerosene. This was a bad idea, her mom would tell her, she thought. Yet sitting somewhere without a drink in front of her could lead to even more trouble. The woman poured and poured until the glass was completely full, and Ariel quickly got a few bills out of her handbag and threw them on the counter. She had no idea what the prices in here even were, but the thought of staying there, this close to this strange woman for a second longer, filled her with dread. The lady pulled back the bottle, spilling some of the drink as she greedily snatched the bills off the counter, and Ariel took her glass and turned away, not bothering to wait for her change. She could still feel the 3 guys watching her walk to the back of the small room, and only now realized that no one had uttered a single word since she had arrived. This wasn't how she had imagined it would go, if she was honest. She had hoped for people in here, talking, Maybe some kind of priest of the cult being here, recruiting new members. But this was nothing. Well, Ariel thought as she reached a small table with 2 chairs in the corner of the room. Sometimes you gotta wait, right? She sat down and looked openly at the 3 guys still staring at her. 2 of them at least had the decency to now lower their eyes, while the third one stood up and came toward her. Ariel pulled at her handbag and grabbed hold of the taser inside it as she stared openly at the man walking through the room. He was at least 60, but built like a brick house. Probably one of the day laborers, Ariel thought, and felt a lump in her throat. Whatever he wanted from her, it wouldn't be anything good. She steeled herself as he approached, and then suddenly grabbed the back of the second chair. "What are you looking for, young lady?" The voice echoed through the small room, and Ariel had to force herself to keep meeting his eyes. She could tell him she was waiting for someone, or claim that she was connected to the bar's owner, but every instinct she had screamed at her not to get caught in some stupid lie. The guy was staring down at her now, waiting for her answer, but instead of opening her mouth, Ariel rummaged around in her handbag and soon felt what she was looking for. Without a word spoken, she pulled out the paper calling card with a strange symbol on it and slammed it on the table. The change in the guy's face was immediate. All color seemed to drain out of his skin, and his eyes shifted from the card to her to the barkeeper. Ariel wanted to grin triumphantly, but the sheer terror in his eyes made her hesitate. He bent down further, his face only a hand's width from hers, and hissed in a quiet voice. "Put that away, lady. Run if you know what's good for you." She was shaking her head softly. This was why she had come here, and she wouldn't simply drop the story because of one man. The taser was still in her bag. "I need answers," she whispered back. To her surprise, the man stopped standing and sat in a chair. She could see real fear in his eyes as she shot the barkeeper another glance, making sure no one was listening to them before he fixated on her again. "Put it away. I mean it. It's dangerous." Ariel stayed defiant. The guy in front of her knew something about it, and she was determined to get it out of him. "What are they planning? Where can I find them?" Her own voice had a strange edge to it as she whispered those words. Even though she didn't want to, she could feel the tension mounting. The man across from her shook his head softly. "They are everywhere, lady. And if one of them sees that card, you can't even imagine what will happen. People disappear. You hear me?" Ariel put up a cocky smile. "People disappear here every day. Have done so long before whatever this has started." The eyes of the man grew even colder. "You're not from here, I guess." "They are everywhere now, and people disappear night after night. Why do you think the streets are this empty?" Ariel couldn't really answer and decided to simply stare at the guy to keep him talking. "The ones you see, the bald-looking ones, they're not the real threat, lady. There are more of them here than you would believe. They have been multiplying for months, staying in all the dark places, biding their time, while those that look almost human have infiltrated every single building and company. The docks are swarming with them. The sewers are chock full of things you couldn't even imagine. We're already dead down here, lady. You guys in the upper city just haven't realized it yet. Ariel snorted derisively and shook her head. I know what I sound like. Don't go around asking questions and leave. Not just this bar, but this city, this country. Something is brewing beneath our feet, and they have started calling out to someone else. Ariel wanted to retort, but as her eyes wandered down to the hands of the man, she could see something that made her stop. Firstly, they were trembling. Secondly, she could see deep red marks running up and under the sleeves of his jacket. Quickly, she reached out and grabbed hold of the wrist, pulling at the hand while pushing back the article of clothing. The man didn't stop her. He didn't move at all as she revealed what looked like a dozen freshly scabbed over cuts. I caught one of them. Not the human-looking kind. They don't like that, and they immediately knew where I had taken him. I jumped through a window on the 3rd floor to escape. He sounded almost proud, then slowly and carefully grabbed her hand and pulled it off of him with ease. They're still hiding. At least most of them. But I think they'll be changing soon. You can see some of the worst ones already walking around in the alleys out there. They wear robes and Hessian sacks to cover up their fucked up bodies and faces. If you see someone with what looks like scales on their forehead, turn away and run. It sounded completely insane, but Ariel couldn't shake the feeling that the man was telling her the truth. His eyes still looked at her, but now all she could see in them was sadness. We'll all be dead soon, lady. Me and you. But there has to be someone who leads them, someone who tells them what to do. Maybe the first one that arrived here. Ariel almost shrieked as the man shot up from his chair and bent down over her until his mouth was close enough to her ear that she could feel his hot breath on her skin. The barkeeper, Gladys, is one of their human followers. Do not let her see that card with her good eye, and leave as quickly as you can. This is no longer a place for humans. The great devourer is coming. That's what they say. Ariel reached out for his arm again, but the man pulled back before she could get to him. As insane as he sounded, it could serve as a starting point for her story, she reasoned. But the guy was already walking off, now heading for the door. The two other guys sitting around were shooting her glances again, but what made her even more nervous was that she now could see the barkeeper staring at her openly. Ariel's hand shot out, and she grabbed the card from the table, putting it into her own pocket. It didn't mean she believed a word the guy had said, but the thought of being stared at by that blind eye still made her shiver. The spa here was a bust, she told herself. As long as no one else was around, at least. The other two guys wouldn't talk to her. She knew that much at a glance. Which would only leave the barkeeper. There was no way she'd get anything useful out of her. Ariel picked up the still-filled drink and brought it back to the counter. It was the least she could do. Maybe she might be able to start writing the article with what she had heard already. Swing by the docks and see what she could find. She had seen some of the people working there, and they had kinda looked like what the man had talked about. A hand grabbed her wrist with surprising strength, and as Ariel looked up, she could see the barkeeper's pockmarked face right in front of her. "What do we have here?" She heard the woman hiss as the second hand dove into her pocket and snatched a small calling card. Ariel pulled away and let a glass fall, then shatter on the dirty, grimy floor. The one healthy eye of the crone glowed in delight as she stared at the card now in her old, wrinkled hand. Ariel tried speaking, but her voice caught in her throat. The old woman's mouth was open, and her yellow and black stained teeth glimmered in the weak light of the bar. This was bad. Her instincts told her. Something bad was happening. An ear-piercing scream filled the bar as the old woman shrieked at the top of her lungs. Ariel staggered back, shocked, but through the ringing in her ears she could hear something else. Other voices answering. They were coming from down below. A basement or the like. Ariel felt a vibration running through the boards beneath her feet, looked past the old woman and the counter, and could see a door in the back. Feet were racing toward it from the cellar. They sounded strange, more like claws than boots. Ariel whirled around and ran for the entrance. The man who had talked to her had left already, and the two guys sitting at the tables had their faces turned down. Something was coming. Her instincts kept screaming in her mind. Ariel reached the door and threw her shoulder against it, pushing it open with force as she stumbled outside into the far too weak-looking sunlight. They would follow her. She turned and ran down the sidewalk. No people were around. No one would help her. Ariel passed by the empty skyscraper, only this time she could hear stuff moving in there. More feet. Or whatever they were. They had heard the screams as well. Shit. She needed to get away from here as quickly as she could. Her feet carried her past an alley, and out of the corner of her eyes, she could see movement in the darkness. Crouching figures crawling from a place below. The man had spoken the truth, a part of her mind warned her. They were everywhere. Below them, they lived. Ariel ran on, jumped off the sidewalk, and raced along the open, empty street. She wanted to be as far away from the dark alleys as she could possibly be. Things were moving in there. She needed to warn someone, anyone. Ariel could see the street turning up ahead, where more empty buildings were standing, and redoubled her effort. There had to be someone somewhere. Maybe the guy from before? He could help her. She ran past a corner and could see a splash of paint in the grey and dirty-looking streets. The taxi. It was the same one as before. The car must have stopped there and waited for her, right on the side of the road. Ariel could hear the sound of boots on the asphalt of the road and looked over her shoulder for a second. A man was following her, running behind her openly. He was bald, gaunt, and had this strange, motionless expression on his face. There was no doubt he was coming for her, and that he wasn't alone. She could hear more of them, but the others kept to the dark alleys, racing after her as well. Whatever she did, she needed to get away from them. Ariel could feel her lungs burning, but forced herself to run even faster. The taxi was just ahead. She could make it before this man caught up to her. Her eyes recognized something that almost made her stumble. The passenger side door of the taxi was standing open. There was blood on the sidewalk, a trail leading into the dark alleys. Ariel shook her head, but kept running. It didn't matter what she saw. If the driver was gone, she would drive it herself. All she needed to do was reach it. The steps behind her were getting closer and closer. This man running after her was quick, and at a second glance over her shoulder, she could see that his expression was as passive and emotionless as before. He didn't show any sign of exhaustion at all. Ariel screamed. The taxi. It was her only chance. With a howl on her lips, she raced forward while ignoring the sound of footsteps in her back and the noise of bodies slithering through the shadows until her hand finally reached the taxi's driver's side door. It was empty. Ariel didn't care. She pulled it open and jumped inside. The key was still in the ignition, even though there was no sign of the driver besides the trail of blood leading into the dark alley next to it. Something was moving there. Ariel almost threw herself over the center console and grabbed at the passenger side door to pull it shut, as she could see a figure coming toward her with insane speed. Whatever it wasn't human. She screamed as she saw it, tried pushing herself back into the driver's seat, and then not even a split second later, felt the impact. Something hard and heavy hit the passenger side door, and the bang filled the whole car. Ariel could see the side bending inward and heard the glass bursting as the tires got pushed sideways. Her body was yanked back, the door behind her opened, and she tumbled out into the street. She screamed in shock and horror and tried to get up to her feet, but someone was above her before she could even get her legs under herself again. Two hands grabbed hold of her shoulders, and she stared up into a face that looked human. But then, somehow, wrong. There was no kind of emotion in the bald and gaunt man's eyes. His hands and fingers pressed into her shoulders as she tried to throw herself around to get out of his grasp. This man, this thing, didn't even register her struggle. It held her as she thrashed around and kicked at him while more and more footsteps were coming closer. Ariel could see it out of the corner of her eyes. Hunched figures, clad in robes and sacks, streamed out of the alley. They had the same skin as the man holding her, yet their bodies were completely deformed. As if they had tried to pass as humans, but had failed. Long, bare grey legs shuffled over the asphalt and toward her. Ariel screamed for help, but her voice only echoed back uselessly from the empty, derelict buildings surrounding them. The thing that had hit the car was crawling over, and for the first time, she could see it clearly. The face was almost human, but there were scales on its brow. Its mouth opened wide, revealing rows of sharp teeth dripping with saliva. Ariel cried as it jumped and ripped her to pieces.